The bus jolted to a stop, and the cold morning air rushed in as more passengers squeezed inside. The aisle was packed, shoulders pressed together, breaths mixing in a fog of impatience. Near the middle, an old man with trembling hands steadied himself on the metal pole, trying to shift his weight as the vehicle lurched forward again. His face looked pale, almost transparent, like someone who had fought too many battles in silence. Then her voice cut through the noise. "Seriously? You think you deserve that seat more than anyone else here?" Heads turned. A young woman with short hair dyed in fiery red stared him down, her jaw tight, her eyes blazing with indignation. She stood firm, arms crossed, as if defending a sacred line no could cross. The old man blinked, confused, his fingers tightening on the pole. He hadn't said a word. He had only glanced at an empty reserved seat. Just glanced, before deciding he didn't have the strength to reach it fast enough. But she didn't wait for explanations. "This is exactly what happens every day," she continued loudly. "Men thinking the world owes them space. You can stand like the rest of us. Don't play helpless." A murmur rippled through the bus. Some passengers lowered their eyes, others watched in stunned silence. The old man's breath grew shallow, and his shoulders curved inward, as if shrinking under the weight of her accusations. Yet his eyes held a flicker of something. Pain, yes, but also an unexpected softness. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The young woman scoffed. "Of course, nothing to say when someone calls you out." Another sudden jolt of the bus made him stumble. His knees wobbled, and he clung to the pole with what little strength remained. For a second, it looked as though he might collapse. A child gasped. Someone reached out instinctively but stopped, unsure. And in that fragile instant, the bus seemed to freeze. The young woman's expression cracked, just a fraction, revealing a shadow of doubt. But her pride forced her chin even higher, her arms gripping tighter across her chest. The old man finally managed to speak, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm trying my best." Those words, quiet but trembling with exhaustion, swept through the bus like a chill. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and everyone felt it, even if they didn't yet know the story hidden behind his fading strength. The conflict had begun, and no one on that bus was ready for how deeply it would unfold. The bus rattled onward, but the atmosphere had thickened. Conversations that once filled the space dissolved into uneasy silence. The old man kept his gaze lowered, focusing on the patterned floor as if it were the only stable thing left in the world. His knuckles whitened around the pole, and a tremor slid through his arm. A woman seated nearby shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe someone should let him—" The young woman cut her off sharply. "He's perfectly capable of standing. He just wants sympathy. That's how men get away with everything." But her voice lacked the same fire as before. Beneath her defiance, a flicker of uncertainty tugged at her expression when she noticed how the old man's chest rose unevenly, as if each breath cost him more than it should. He swallowed hard and tried again, his voice fragile and worn. "I'm sorry if I troubled you." That simple apology hit the bus like a stone tossed into still water. A few passengers exchanged glances, unsure whether they were witnessing a misunderstanding or something crueler. The young woman tightened her grip on her tote bag. For a moment her eyes broke away from him, scanning the window where her own reflection stared back. Tense, defensive, unyielding. A memory stirred, one she had no intention of revisiting. But it flickered there, just beneath her frustration. The old man shifted his weight again, and a sharp grimace crossed his face. He tried to hide it, but the pain slipped through, unmistakable. Sweat beaded at his temple despite the cold. The child who had gasped earlier now tugged at his mother's sleeve, whispering, "Mom, he doesn't look good." The bus jerked suddenly, and the old man stumbled once more. This time his foot hesitated, dragging slightly. He caught himself, but only barely. A low cough escaped his throat, dry and strained, and he pressed a shaking hand to his ribs. Something inside the young woman jolted. It wasn't compassion, not yet. It was confusion, a crack in her certainty. She had come onto the bus ready to confront the world, to stand firm against anything that resembled entitlement or injustice. But this man, He wasn't fighting back. He wasn't dismissing her. He wasn't even defending himself. He just looked tired, deeply, achingly tired. Still, pride anchored her. "Look, if you're not feeling well, maybe take a cab next time," she muttered, softer but still sharp around the edges. His eyes lifted to hers at last. They were pale, watery, carrying a lifetime of quiet endurance. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, something heavy and unsettling. "I would have," he said gently, "if I hadn't just spent everything I had trying to stay alive." The bus stilled. Her mouth parted, but no words emerged. Passengers leaned in without meaning to, sensing the shift. The accusation, the tension, the indignation. Everything hung suspended as his statement echoed through the cramped space. Whatever story lay behind those words, it was far heavier than anyone had imagined. And as the bus rolled forward, the young woman felt, for the first time, the first fragile thread pulling her toward a truth she had never expected to face. For a long moment, the old man's words floated in the air, fragile but undeniable. The bus continued its steady rumble, but inside, it felt as though the world had stopped. Even the driver briefly glanced in the rearview mirror, sensing the shift in energy. The young woman blinked rapidly, her confidence wavering. She opened her mouth to respond, but no argument fit, no accusation seemed justified anymore. Her shoulders loosened slightly, and the tension in her jaw softened just enough to reveal confusion beneath the anger. "What do you mean, stay alive?" she asked, her voice lower, no longer seeking an audience. The old man inhaled slowly, as if even speaking required effort. His hand trembled as he wiped a faint sheen of sweat from his brow. "Staying alive takes work," he murmured, "and sometimes more money than a person has." A few passengers exchanged concerned glances. A man seated near the front shifted uncomfortably, clearly reconsidering his earlier silence. The child watching him looked worried, clutching his backpack tighter. The young woman tried to maintain her stance, but her eyes were beginning to betray her, flicking over the old man's posture, his sunken cheeks, the faint bruise-like shadows under his eyes. She had screamed at men before, confronted what she saw as arrogance or privilege. But this didn't look like privilege. This looked like someone fading. Still, she clung to her certainty. "Everyone struggles. That doesn't mean you get to..." But her sentence died as the old man swayed again, knees buckling for a second before he steadied himself with a shaky grip on the pole. A soft groan escaped him, barely audible, but unmistakable. Gasps broke out around him. A middle-aged woman rose, reaching toward him. "Sir, please, take my seat." He shook his head gently, a faint apologetic smile forming. No, you keep your seat. You need it more than I do." The woman frowned. "I'm perfectly fine." His eyes softened. "You have somewhere to go, someone waiting for you." He paused, letting the words settle. "I'm just trying to get home and not make a scene." But his voice faltered on the last word. He blinked hard, and for the first time, a tear threatened at the corner of his eye. He quickly brushed it away, embarrassed. The young woman felt her chest tighten unexpectedly. The righteous fire that had fueled her earlier now flickered uncertainly. Her principles hadn't changed, but something about the situation no longer aligned with the simple narrative she carried inside her. "Why are you even out alone?" she asked quietly. If it's that serious?" He hesitated, as though deciding whether to share something deeply personal. His lips parted, then closed again. The struggle wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. Finally, he exhaled. "Because today, I had to." The bus lurched, but no one looked away from him. His gaze drifted to the window where the gray city blurred past. "I was at the hospital," he whispered, "and I needed a moment to breathe before going home." The young woman felt something inside her crack, an unfamiliar sensation she didn't want to name. The passengers leaned closer, drawn not by curiosity, but by the quiet gravity of a man carrying more weight than his frail frame should ever have been asked to bear. And in that thick silence, a story none of them expected began to take root. The bus rolled past a row of shuttered shops, their windows fogged from the cold. Inside, no one seemed to notice the city anymore. Every pair of eyes was locked on the old man, who stood hunched and weary, as if revealing even a fragment of his truth had drained what little strength he had left. The young woman swallowed, her voice cautious. "What happened at the hospital?" He didn't answer right away. His breath came unevenly, as though gathering the words required more effort than standing upright. The passengers waited, not out of impatience, but out of a quiet, collective concern. Finally, he spoke. "I had a test today," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the floor. "A test to confirm whether the treatment is still working." His tone was neither dramatic nor self-pitying. It was matter-of-fact, almost resigned. And yet every syllable carried the echo of a battle he had fought alone for far too long. The young woman's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. The tension that once powered her indignation now felt misplaced, small, even childish. She took a small step closer without realizing it. "And did it?" she whispered. His eyelids fluttered closed for a brief moment. When he opened them again, a frail sadness shimmered there. "No, it didn't." The bus hummed quietly beneath their feet, the only sound in the stunned silence that followed. A man by the window pressed his lips together, looking away. The child, sensing the heaviness, leaned against his mother, who softly stroked his hair. The old man continued, his voice steady but thin. "They told me I might have a little less time than we hoped." A sharp intake of breath came from someone in the back. The young woman's chest tightened, her earlier certainty dissolving into something tangled and raw. Her eyes softened, not out of pity, but out of realization. She had attacked a stranger without knowing that he was standing on the edge of his life. He tried to smile again, but it looked more like a flinch. "I didn't mean to cause trouble, I just didn't want to fall. My legs aren't what they used to be." The woman who had offered her seat earlier shook her head, guilt clouding her features. "You should sit, please. You're not taking anything from anyone." But the old man raised a trembling hand. "No, thank you. I'd rather stand a little longer. It makes me feel still capable." His voice cracked on the last word, revealing a vulnerability he could no longer hide. The young woman noticed it, the way he clung not just to the pole but to dignity itself, refusing to let it slip. Her throat tightened. She had spent years fighting for fairness, for equality, for respect. But now she saw a man fighting for something much simpler and infinitely more fragile, a moment of autonomy in a life slipping away. She stepped closer, her voice nearly a whisper. "I didn't know." He nodded weakly. "Most don't." His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw depth there. Not weakness, not entitlement, but a quiet resilience carved from decades of surviving, giving, enduring. The bus continued forward, but everything inside it had changed, and the young woman sensed instinctively that the story behind those tired eyes was far from over. The old man's gaze drifted to the fogged window as the bus turned a corner, the sky outside washed in pale gray. He looked as though he were staring at something far beyond the passing streets, something only he could see. The passengers waited quietly, sensing that he carried more than illness in those tired eyes. The young woman shifted her stance, no longer defensive. Her voice emerged softer than she expected. "You said you didn't have the money for a cab. But why were you alone? Doesn't someone go with you to the hospital?" He hesitated, swallowing as if the question pressed against an old wound. "I had someone," he said gently. "My wife." His lips curved in the faint outline of a smile. "She never let me go anywhere alone, always fussing over me, always worrying." A longing warmth flickered across his face, then dimmed. "But she passed away last winter." A quiet gasp escaped from someone nearby. The young woman lowered her eyes, guilt slipping through her like a slow ache. He continued, voice steady but wrapped in unmistakable grief. She fought harder than I ever did. And even on her worst days, she'd still say, "Make sure you stay strong for me." He paused, blinking away a tremor in his vision. "I'm still trying." The young woman felt her throat tighten. She imagined him walking through hospital corridors alone, sitting in waiting rooms meant for two, clutching test results with no hand to hold but his own. "And your family?" she asked carefully. "Do you have children?" A faint, distant sadness washed over him. "A daughter, smart, determined, a bit like you." His voice grew quieter. But life took her far away. A demanding job, a different world. He inhaled shakily. "I don't blame her. Children grow, build their own lives. That's how it should be." The young woman's chest tightened further. Something in his tone felt familiar, not the details, but the loneliness beneath them. Her own mother's voice flickered in memory, calling her stubborn, impossible, always fighting the world. She had worn that as a badge of honor. Until now. The old man rubbed his thumb over a dent in the metal pole, a small gesture to steady himself. "I didn't expect today to be hard. I thought maybe I'd get good news." His shoulders sagged. "But sometimes life doesn't listen to what we hope for." A man from the back spoke up, his voice thick. "You should sit, sir. Please, it's okay." But the old man smiled gently and shook his head. "If I sit, I'll start thinking too much. Standing keeps my mind from wandering." The young woman stepped closer, the distance between them finally broken. For the first time since boarding the bus, her voice carried no edge. "I misjudged you," she said quietly. He looked at her with surprising kindness. "People misjudge each other every day. We see what we expect to see." Her eyes glimmered with something sharp, remorse maybe, or a truth she had avoided for a long time. "I thought you were just another man taking advantage, another person ignoring others." He nodded thoughtfully. "And I thought I could get through this day alone." A faint breath escaped him, almost a chuckle. "Seems we were both wrong." Their eyes met, hers softened by regret, his by tenderness, and for a moment, the hum of the bus felt like a heartbeat holding them all in place. Then his hand slipped on the pole. He steadied himself, but his body trembled, his face paling even further. A ripple of alarm spread through the passengers. The young woman stepped forward without hesitation. "Sir, are you okay?" His lips parted as though to speak, but nothing came out. Instead, he pressed a hand to his chest, not in pain, more in effort, as if holding something inside before it shattered. Whatever he had been carrying was about to surface. The old man's fingers curled around the pole as if it were the last solid thing in a world tilting beneath his feet. His breath hitched, shallow and uneven. A thin tremor rippled through his frame, and for the first time, pure fear flickered across his features. The young woman froze, then instinctively reached out, steadying his elbow before he could slip again. Hey, look at me," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay composed. "Are you feeling dizzy?" He tried to answer, but the moment he lifted his eyes to hers, something shifted. His expression softened, not with resignation but with a kind of fragile surrender, as though he had been holding back a truth so heavy that his body could no longer carry it alone. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't want to worry anyone." The passengers leaned in, breaths caught, as he struggled to stay upright. The young woman's voice softened further. "You're not alone here. Just take a moment." He shook his head gently, a frail attempt at reassurance. "I've been taking moments. Too many, maybe. Trying not to fall apart where people can see." His gaze drifted upward, unfocused, as if searching for words he wasn't sure he was ready to speak. "I wasn't supposed to be on this bus today," he murmured. "I was supposed to go straight home after the hospital, but I needed one last stop." The young woman exchanged a confused look with a nearby passenger. "A stop? Where?" He took a small, trembling breath. "The community center on Maple Street." The young woman blinked, surprised. The women's shelter? He nodded faintly. My wife volunteered there for years, and when she got sick, I took her place. Never as strong as she was, but I tried. A brittle smile appeared. Today was supposed to be my last visit. I wanted to leave a donation in her name. Something small. Something to feel close to her again. His voice wavered, and for a moment he couldn't go on. The entire bus fell silent, as if the world outside no longer mattered. The young woman felt her chest tighten painfully. The image of him, frail and alone, walking from hospital to bus stop to shelter, carrying grief and illness with no one beside him. It hit her harder than she expected. But I couldn't get there, he continued, his voice cracking. My legs gave out halfway. I sat on a bench, just trying to breathe. His hand trembled against the pole. I thought if I boarded the bus, maybe I could make it. Maybe just sitting for a moment would help. A tear slipped down his cheek, unnoticed by him, but not by anyone else. So when I saw the empty seat, I didn't mean to. His words dissolved. His throat tightened. He lowered his head in shame he never deserved. The young woman felt something collapse inside her. Pride, certainty, the rigid armor she had carried for years. She took his hand gently, her voice almost breaking. You don't have to explain anything, not anymore. He lifted his eyes, glassy and tired, meeting hers with a vulnerability that silenced even her deepest convictions. For the first time since the argument began, she didn't see a stranger. She saw a man who had loved deeply, lost profoundly, and fought quietly. A man who needed kindness, not judgment. The bus slowed as it approached the next stop, but no one moved. No one breathed too loudly. The story unfolding before them had bound every life inside that vehicle to his. And the young woman felt, with sudden clarity, that her own story was about to change too. The bus lurched gently as it approached a traffic light, its brakes sighing under the weight of a silence too heavy for such a crowded space. The old man stood trembling, his frail hand still resting in the young woman's. She hadn't let go. She couldn't. Something inside her, something she had spent years fortifying, was finally starting to crack. Her voice came out unsteady. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. I was wrong. He looked at her with a tenderness that made her chest tighten. You were passionate, he said softly. Passion isn't wrong. It just needs direction. The young woman felt heat rise to her cheeks. She wasn't used to being spoken to gently by the people she confronted. Most fought back, defended themselves, raised their voices. But this man she had accused, only offered kindness. The light turned green, and the bus resumed its steady movement. A man seated nearby cleared his throat, uncomfortable. A woman dabbed her eyes discreetly with a tissue. Even the driver glanced again in the mirror, as if afraid to miss what came next. The young woman steadied her breath. I thought I was standing up for something important. I thought you were ignoring the rules. I didn't know. You couldn't have known. He interjected gently. We all carry things no one sees. His words struck her deeper than she expected. For a moment, her eyes drifted toward the window, watching the blurred city rush past. Her reflection stared back, jaw no longer hardened, posture no longer rigid. The edges of her indignation softened into something raw and unfamiliar. I've spent so long fighting, she admitted quietly. Maybe sometimes I forget to look before I swing. The old man gave a weak laugh, the kind that carried both weariness and gratitude. Fighting is necessary, he said, but compassion is what keeps the world from breaking. The young woman felt a sting behind her eyes, a warning of tears she refused to let fall. She cleared her throat, trying to steady herself. You remind me of someone, she whispered. My grandmother. She always said things like that. She was kinder than I ever learned to be. He tilted his head slightly, studying her face with a gentle curiosity. Kindness doesn't always come first, he murmured. Sometimes it arrives after we see ourselves clearly. Her grip tightened on his hand, not out of pity, but out of something deeper. something uncertain and growing. The bus swayed and the old man's body slumped slightly to the side. Instinctively, she placed her other hand on his back to steady him. His breathing had become shallow again, each inhale a fragile effort. "Sir, you're getting worse," she said, fear threading into her voice. He tried to smile, but the expression faltered. "I'm just tired. It's been a long day." Passengers exchanged alarmed glances. Murmurs rose, quiet, concerned, helpless. The young woman's heart pounded. "Let me call someone, a friend, a neighbor, anyone who can meet you. You shouldn't go home alone." His eyes drifted downward. "I don't have anyone close enough to call." The word struck her like a blow. No one, no family nearby, no wife, no friend waiting, no safety net. Just a man who had spent his life giving and was now walking his final stretch alone. Her chest tightened painfully. She had boarded the bus ready for a battle. She had never expected to meet someone who would change the way she saw the world. The old man blinked slowly, his knees beginning to weaken again. And then, before anyone could move, his hand slipped from the pole. His balance faltered. The young woman surged forward, arms outstretched, and the entire bus lurched into motion, every passenger watching as the moment that would change everything unfolded before their eyes. The old man's body tilted dangerously as the bus jolted forward, his grip finally giving way. For an instant, time seemed to slow, the sway of his coat, the widening of his eyes, the silent gasp that rippled through the rows of passengers. The young woman lunged, catching him just before he collapsed. Her arms wrapped around his frail frame and his weight, light, too light, settled against her. A collective exhale swept through the bus, as though every person had been holding their breath at once. "Sir, stay with me," she urged, lowering him gently until he could lean against one of the seats. His skin felt cold beneath her hands, his breath uneven and strained. A man stood up immediately. "Let him take my seat. Hurry!" But the old man shook his head weakly. "No, I'm fine. I just need a minute." "You're not fine," the young woman insisted, her voice trembling. "You almost fell." He looked up at her, eyes glassy but calm. "I've fallen before. This time, someone caught me." His cracked smile held gratitude, but behind it was something hauntingly final. Her chest tightened. She knelt beside him as the passengers shifted, creating space around them. The hum of the engine seemed distant now, swallowed by the fragile moment unfolding in the middle of the aisle. "Please," she whispered, "don't try to be strong right now." He shook his head gently, a soft, stubborn pride still flickering in him. "Strength isn't the problem," he murmured. "It's time. I'm running out of it." A chill swept through her. She grasped his hand without thinking, startled by how cold it felt. Her voice broke despite her attempts to hold it steady. "You're not alone." "Not anymore. I'm here." He blinked slowly, absorbing her words. A tear rolled down his cheek, tracing the deep lines carved by grief and years of selfless living. "You're very kind," he whispered. "Kinder than you think." She shook her head. "No, you're wrong about that." But he only smiled, that same tender, wavering smile that seemed to carry decades of understanding. The bus driver glanced back again. "Do I need to stop? Call someone?" The young woman's heart pounded. She looked at the old man, silently begging him to let them help. He hesitated, breath fluttering, then managed a weak nod. "Maybe. Just stop for a moment. Please." The driver pulled over near a quiet stretch of road lined with bare winter trees. The doors hissed open, and cold air drifted in. Passengers watched silently, united by the tension of the moment. No irritation, no judgment, only concern. The old man leaned his head back against the seat, eyes half closed. "I didn't mean to frighten anyone," he murmured. "You didn't frighten anyone," she said softly. "You made us see you. That's different." His breathing steadied slightly, but exhaustion pulled at every feature of his face. She brushed a shaking hand against her cheek, not realizing a tear had escaped. "I should have asked your name," she whispered. "I yelled at you before I even knew who you were." His eyes opened, soft and warm despite the pain. "My name is Samuel," she repeated it in a whisper. "Samuel. And yours?" he asked. She hesitated, then answered quietly, "Lena." Samuel nodded faintly as though memorizing it mattered to him. "Thank you, Lena, for caring." Her throat tightened. "I should have cared sooner." He shook his head. "No, you cared when it counted." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the cold wind outside filled the silence. The passengers watched, some wiping tears, others clasping their hands in quiet empathy. And as the old man gathered what little strength he had left, Lena felt the weight of a realization settle over her. She had boarded that bus ready to fight the world, but she had found someone who showed her what fighting truly meant. Not shouting, not anger, not certainty, but the quiet courage of a man still trying to stand, even as life pushed him to his knees. And now she feared the hardest part of his story was still coming. Samuel's breathing steadied just enough for him to sit upright, though Lena kept a protective hand on his shoulder. Outside, cold wind rustled the branches, but inside the bus, the silence felt sacred. No one dared speak too loudly, afraid that even their voices might shatter the fragile moment. Samuel exhaled slowly, his chest rising with visible effort. "There's something I never told anyone," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Not even my daughter." Lena leaned closer, her heart pounding. "You don't have to tell us anything," she whispered. "Just rest." But Samuel shook his head softly. "No. I want to. People should know who my wife really was." The passengers leaned in, drawn by the gentleness in his tone and the weight of whatever he was about to reveal. She was the kindest person I ever met, the kind of woman who made every room warmer just by being in it. A faint smile curved his lips. When she got sick, she never complained. Not once. She only worried about the women at the shelter. She'd say, "Promise me you'll take care of them if I can't." He paused, swallowing carefully, as if the memory itself hurt. "I made that promise, and I kept it. Every week I went there. I fixed things. I cooked. I listened. I did anything they needed, because she believed every one of those women deserved dignity." A murmur of admiration swept through the bus. Even those who had remained stoic now blinked back tears. Lena felt her chest tighten, a mixture of remorse and awe threading through her breath. "You honored her," she whispered. "You really did." Samuel looked down at his trembling hands. "But I didn't expect that keeping her promise would be the only thing holding me together." His voice cracked. "After she died, the shelter became the only place where I still felt her near." Lena bit her lip, fighting back a wave of emotion. This man, this quiet, fading man she had yelled at, was everything she claimed to stand for: compassion, strength, sacrifice. And she had attacked him without seeing any of it. Samuel's eyes grew distant, as though he were seeing the center for the last time. "Today I went there with a donation envelope. Not much, just what little I saved after paying the bills. I wanted to leave it with her photo on the wall, a way of saying, I'm still here, I'm still trying." His voice shook, and Lena felt herself trembling with him. "But when I stepped inside," he continued softly, "the director was crying. They said the shelter is closing next month." His breath hitched. "They're losing funding. There's nowhere for the women to go." A wave of heartbreak spread through the bus. Lena felt her eyes burn. She covered her mouth to keep her emotions from breaking open. "Samuel, I'm so sorry." He nodded weakly. "I couldn't stay there. It felt like losing her all over again. Every wall, every chair, every face. Everything reminded me of what she built. And now it's all slipping away." His voice fell to a whisper. "I walked out before they could see me cry." Lena reached for his hand again, holding it tightly. "You shouldn't have had to face that alone." Samuel looked at her with eyes full of grief and gratitude. "I thought I could make it home. I thought I could be strong for just one more hour. His voice softened, trembling. But I guess even the strongest hearts reach a moment when they break. Lena closed her eyes, and a silent tear slid down her cheek. Then don't break alone, she whispered. Not while I'm here. Around them, passengers wiped tears they no longer tried to hide. Strangers who had boarded the bus with impatient hearts now sat united in the quiet ache of one man's loss. Samuel inhaled slowly, his chest rising with visible effort. "Thank you," he murmured. "All of you. I didn't expect kindness today." Lena squeezed his hand. "You deserve it, more than you know." But even as she spoke, she felt a tremor pass through Samuel's body, a small one, but different. His fingers loosened, his breath wavered, and the fear that had been building in her chest suddenly sharpened into something cold and urgent. Samuel's fingers slipped slightly from Lena's grasp, and her heart lurched. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Stay with me, please." His eyelids fluttered, heavy as stones, and for a terrifying second, Lena thought he was fading right there in her arms. Passengers rose from their seats, some moving closer, others covering their mouths in dread. The bus, filled just minutes ago with the noise of traffic and shifting bodies, now felt like a fragile sanctuary poised on the edge of tragedy. Samuel drew in a thin breath. "I'm still here," he murmured, though his voice was faint. "Just tired." Lena steadied him, her hands trembling. "We're getting you help. Driver, call an ambulance." The driver already had his phone in hand. "On it!" But Samuel shook his head weakly. "No hospitals, not today." Lena leaned closer, her tears falling freely now. "You need them. You could..." He touched her hand gently, stopping her words. "Listen, please." She nodded, swallowing hard. "I didn't come on this bus to scare anyone," he whispered. "I only wanted to get home. Sit in my chair. Look at her picture. Tell her I tried my best today, even if it wasn't enough." His voice cracked, and Lena felt something break inside her. "You did enough," she said fiercely. "More than enough. Your wife would be proud. So proud." A faint smile touched his lips. "You sound like her. She always spoke her truth, even when it hurt." His gaze softened. "Just like you." Lena let out a shaky breath. "I didn't speak truth today. I spoke anger. But you listened," he whispered. "That matters more." Around them, passengers watched with glistening eyes, people who had boarded the bus strangers, but were leaving it changed. Samuel's breathing steadied slightly, though his body remained fragile. His hand tightened around Lena's just enough to let her know he was still present, still fighting. "There's something else," he said softly. "Something I want you to know." Lena leaned in. "Anything." "My wife believed..." He paused, gathering his strength. "She believed people could change, even when they thought they couldn't." His tired eyes met hers with surprising clarity. "Promise me you won't stop fighting, but fight with compassion. The world needs that more than anger." Lena bit her lip, overwhelmed. "I promise," she whispered. "I swear I will." Samuel exhaled, relief settling over his face like a warm blanket. "Good, that's good." Sirens faintly approached in the distance. The driver waved from the front. "They're almost here." Lena squeezed Samuel's hand. "You're going to be okay, Samuel. You're not going home alone." He nodded slowly, his expression peaceful. "Thank you, Lena, for seeing me." The ambulance pulled up beside the bus, lights flashing against the windows. Paramedics rushed in, kneeling beside Samuel with practiced calm. As they lifted him carefully onto a stretcher, he kept his gaze fixed on her. "Don't forget your promise," he whispered. "I won't," she said, her voice breaking. "I'll carry it with me." Samuel gave a faint smile, small, fragile, but filled with something profound. Hope, gratitude, a final thread of connection. The paramedics lifted him from the bus, and as he disappeared from view, the passengers remained silent, letting the moment settle into their hearts. Lena stayed frozen in the aisle, tears streaking her cheeks. Someone touched her shoulder gently, a woman from the back. "You did right by him," she said softly. But Lena shook her head. "No, he did right by me." She stepped off the bus moments later, watching the ambulance pull away. The cold air stung her face, but she welcomed it. It felt like a beginning. For the first time in a long time, her anger had quieted, replaced by something harder, something braver: compassion. She wiped her cheeks, straightened her shoulders, and whispered into the empty street, "Rest easy, Samuel. I'll keep your fight alive." And as she walked away, the world around her felt different, not because it had changed, but because she had.